All right, today, guys, we're going to be talking about receiver roles. So we're going to be actually breaking down what the X, Z, and slot receivers do, how they differ, and how they line up differently and everything like that. So we had some feedback from the first video that I did on the dagger concept that some people maybe would be interested in getting more background information on that kind of thing. So we're going to do this Football 101 series. We're going to dive into a couple of those kinds of things, and we're also going to still dive into all of those different receiving concepts and different things that you can expect the Colts to run this year. But I thought this kind of a series would maybe help things be more clear to those of you who are maybe newer to that kind of thing. So we're gonna jump into that a little bit. And so the first thing I need to explain is how the personnel system works. So when we talk about 11 personnel, what we're referring to is one running back, one tight end. That's what the number designation is there. So if it was 12 personnel, it's one running back, two tight ends, and the Colts will probably run that often. They got a good, strong tight end group. So this diagram, obviously, of this play is in 11 personnel, standard personnel. You've got the X receiver lined up to the left side on the line of scrimmage. The slot receiver, designated with an F, is off the line of scrimmage and inside the X. That Y represents the tight end, and obviously he's on the line of scrimmage, and then the Z is off the line of scrimmage outside of the tight end, and that's pretty typically where you'll see the Z receiver. So we're going to actually break down what each of these roles are, how these guys play the game differently, and what you should expect out of a receiver as far as both body type, style of play, and general skill set, if they are listed as one of those pretty typically, and kind of help you to be able to identify what to expect out of a receiver. So first we're going to talk about the X receiver, and like I said, they line up opposite the tight end on the line of scrimmage. And when we talk about an X receiver, you're talking about your best receiver in the game. So this is the best receiver on your team is going to be the X receiver. They're going to draw double coverage. They're going to be a threat to be able to run deep, to go across the middle. They're going to be a red zone threat. We're talking about guys who are generally taller, stronger, and faster. Julio Jones is an excellent example, AJ Green. And these are guys who can go up and get the ball, who can make plays when you absolutely have to have plays. Calvin Johnson would have definitely qualified as this. And just because you have a player playing in the X position doesn't mean that your team actually has an X receiver, because there are a lot of guys who are playing in that X role, but a true X receiver is one of the best of the best. So not everybody obviously has one of those receivers, and not all of those receivers who are the best of the best actually fit that role. T.Y. Hilton plays out of the X and the slot. He's probably better suited for a slot role. Doesn't mean he's not one of the best receivers in the game, but he's not the traditional X receiver. So obviously roles vary and nothing is hard and fast, but that's generally what we're talking about when we talk about an X receiver. So next we're talking about the Z receiver, and they line up outside the tight end on that tight end side, and they're off the line of scrimmage so that the tight end actually is able to be eligible to catch a pass, and generally going to be a more physical, thicker, shorter receiver, and they're going to need to be good at blocking because they're on that strong side. A lot of times the run play is going that way. They need to be a good run blocker. They can be sent in motion because they're not on the line of scrimmage, and often they're going to be the guy that's moved in order to identify coverage, determine man or zone, and they're going to run combo routes sometimes with the tight end, basing their route off of what the tight end is running and reading off of one another. So they have to have a lot of the same skills that the X has, but they can be a smaller guy. Reggie Wayne spent a ton of time as that Z receiver to Marvin Harrison's X, and because of that, sometimes they don't draw that double coverage. They benefit from that. So if you have a talented Z receiver, it can make a huge difference if you've got a guy who pulls double coverage, because they can really just eat up a ton of yards that way. So this is a guy who is used all over the field. So they're not just deep routes. They're not just running like what a slot receiver would do under the middle and catch and run, but they do need to be able to have a little bit of that quickness that a slot receiver has to be able to make something happen after the catch, and they need to be able to block because they're going to be asked to do it regularly. And that's basically what you're expecting out of that Z receiver. Now you're going to see guys, think Steve Smith, Robert Woods, Stephon Diggs. Like I said, Reggie Wayne definitely would have fit that role, and those are the kind of guys you're talking about. Now, there's still have to be good possession receivers. You definitely don't want your Z receiver to be soft. You've got to have a tough receiver, because they are going to go across the middle, and they're going to have to still go up against cornerbacks, and they're going to be starting cornerbacks. It's not like you're getting the backups here. So they've still got to be talented, but because they're off the line, they're not going to get jammed right at the line of scrimmage like the X receiver is typically going to be. So now we're going to be talking about the slot receiver, which has become a more and more prominent position in the NFL in recent years. They line up inside the X receiver, off the line of scrimmage, just like that Z receiver does. They're typically the shortest, smallest, fastest receiver, but they do have to be pretty tough. They're sent in motion. They're sent across the middle. They're working on short passes. They can be sent out in long, on deep routes. You got to think shifty guys who can get the ball and move in space. Julian Edelman, T.Y. Hilton is actually a perfect example of a very good slot receiver. Jarvis Landry is another. Guys who you can get the ball to in space and who can make something happen. And sometimes they're going to be matched up against a linebacker. Sometimes they're going to be matched up against a slot corner. But this is a guy who you really want to be able to do a little bit of everything. They just don't have to be the biggest guy on the field. And obviously there have been some pretty successful guys who probably look like better fits at slot receiver. T.Y. Hilton is a great example, but Antonio Brown would be another one. Smaller guys who maybe don't make sense on paper as being a number one receiver, but have managed to translate that into their game. So definitely a position that's significant and a little bit different skill set specifically from what the X and the Z bring to the table. Now, one of the things that you're going to immediately notice is that after going through all of these roles and looking at the way that teams line players up, they don't always adhere to these specific prototypes. So this is the type of a guy that you're looking for in an ideal world, and there are not very many teams that live in an ideal world. So you're going to see somebody like T.Y. Hilton who's going to line up in the X, even though maybe he's ideally suited for a slot receiver role. You're going to see somebody like Odell Beckham, who doesn't really fit any of the prototypical receiver standards, but is a dominant X receiver and who can work out of all different positions on the field. So the modern passing game doesn't allow for you to be just one thing and be very effective. It thrives on versatility, and so you'll definitely see the Colts using T.Y. Hilton out of the slot. You'll see him working out of the X and probably out of the Z positions as well. And you're going to see, some of these rookies come in. A lot of these guys that Chris Ballard has brought in are bigger guys, likely to be on that Z side, drawing coverage, either benefiting from the coverage that T.Y. Hilton is drawing or drawing coverage off of him and letting him get open. So it's kind of interesting. When you understand these concepts, you can see how teams use them, but don't get too hung up on the ideas of a player being one thing or another, because otherwise you're going to go crazy when you're trying to watch a game, figuring out why they're not lining up where they should be. So guys, if you're enjoying these breakdowns, subscribe to this channel. Check us out on Stampede Blue for more information. We're going to keep putting these things out here, and most of them are not going to be so basic. So for some of you who are wanting to dig into more the deeper material, we're going to have more of that coming out as well. And for those of you just trying to kind of dip your toes in and figure some things out, hope you enjoyed this and feel like you know a little bit more. Appreciate your feedback, and thanks for checking it out, guys.